Hey, and welcome to Impostrix podcast. My name is Whitney Knoxley, and I'm your host. Here at Impostrix podcast, we affirm the experiences of professionals of color who navigate imposter syndrome or imposter treatment and racial toxicity at work and in their careers. This episode is an asked and answered episode where I'm going to be talking solo about a subject, a topic, answering a question that listeners have posed. This episode is all about learning and really engaging with you all. These episodes are going to be aired periodically. My goal is every other week. And then on alternating weeks, I'll have guests. So this is your one-on-one time with me, Whitney, and I look forward to it. If this is your first time listening and joining us, welcome. I'm glad you're here. And if you're somebody that's listened to episodes before and you're coming back for more, thank you for coming back. Thank you for supporting me. If you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe and to share this episode with somebody who you think would be interested. So let's jump in. Okay, so what is imposter syndrome anyway? Hey y'all, my name is Whitney Knoxley and I'm your host. I'm so happy to have you here with me today. I hope that you stick around. Today we are going to talk about imposter syndrome because I sense that there are questions. So before we get into that though, do me a favor and give me some feedback. Let me know if there's information that you want, or if you have thoughts, or if you want to be a guest on the show. Let me know because I would love to have you and I would love your thoughts. So real quick, we're going to jump into what is imposter syndrome because we're talking about it so much in this podcast. And I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. In fact, we are jumping into our mini series on imposter syndrome. So for the next few episodes, we're going to be talking about how imposter syndrome and imposter experiences show up for our guests, what they are, what we can do about them, what are tools that folks use to overcome imposter syndrome, what is imposter treatment, how does imposter syndrome affect people of racial minorities. We're going to talk about all that stuff. All right, so essentially, imposter syndrome is this idea that we feel as though we are intellectually phony. So imposter syndrome was coined, and it was coined as imposter phenomenon by these two female psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, or Eames. I'm not really sure how to say it. This study happened in 1978. What they did was they took 150 of their clients who were predominantly white women, middle-class women who had careers, PhDs, or who were students in advanced level degree courses. And they studied them because they saw that they were experiencing this kind of self-doubt. And it didn't matter about all the accolades that they had received or all the accomplishments that they had made. It didn't matter to the individual participants of this study. They still felt as though they were intellectually fraud or intellectually phony. And they had this fear that they were going to be found out. And so those are the key components of imposter syndrome, is this idea that I am intellectually fake and that I'm going to be found out. So this is something that I experienced certainly as an attorney. I still experience it 10 years into my career. I experience it as a DEI professional because I don't know everything. And, who does know everything? Despite the fact that I went to school, I did the thing, I passed the bar, I've been trained, I've been in court, I've litigated, I've done all these things. Sometimes when I walk into a courtroom, I just feel like I don't know what the heck I am doing. And I try my best not to let the client see that because, our job is to encourage them and pump them up, not make them feel nervous. So I experience imposter syndrome, and I think a lot of folks do. In fact, up to 80% of people have experienced imposter syndrome at some point in their life. Some other characteristics of imposter syndrome is that people who have this thing going on, this imposter syndrome, they feel as though their success, whatever success that they have achieved, is because they're lucky. And they feel like their failures are the actual showing of their competence. So, in other words, when they succeed, it's just a fluke. But when they fail, it's because they're stupid and don't know shit. Okay? So that's what we're talking about, all right? And again, despite objective evidence to the contrary, folks with imposter syndrome feel this way about themselves. Dr. Valerie Young identified 5 types of imposter syndrome: the perfectionist, the expert, the natural genius, the soloist, and the super person. And so maybe as I'm saying these things, you might relate. I know I do. So the perfectionist, she describes as believing that unless you're absolutely perfect, you could have done better. And because you weren't perfect, then you are an imposter. The expert, so the second type of imposter syndrome, the expert feels like an imposter because they don't know everything that there is to know about something. So I definitely have this experience, particularly where it comes to podcasting, because here I am saying I know all the things, but I don't. I just don't. Nobody can. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a scientist. I suck at science. I don't do brain stuff. What I'm saying is based off of my research and my personal experience, but not based off of me knowing everything. So I can definitely relate to this idea of, having the expert type of imposter syndrome. The natural genius is the third type. And in this type of imposter syndrome, folks feel like a fraud because they don't believe that they're naturally intelligent or competent. And these are folks in particular who feel like if they don't get something right the first time, or it takes them longer to master a skill, then they feel like an imposter. And I know people like this. I do. Some of you listening who are super duper duper smart. But if there's like the one thing that doesn't come easy or doesn't click for you, then all of a sudden you're like, I'm a piece of shit. I'm stupid, blah, blah, blah. And here I am, like, I am not naturally super duper smart. So if I don't get something right the first time, I'm like, oh yeah, because I'm normal. Okay, so the fourth type is the soloist. This type of imposter syndrome, it's this feeling that if I had to have help to reach a certain level or a certain status and couldn't get there on my own, then that I'm an imposter. Which, I mean, look, let's be frank. It's like, how many of us actually pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps and did the thing by our own damn self? Not many of us. Okay, the fifth is the super person. This type of imposter syndrome is where you believe that you have to be the hardest working person and reach the highest level of achievement possible. And if you don't, then you're a fraud. So essentially, your goal is 100 and you got to 99. And because you didn't get to 100, you're a fraud. So these are the 5 types of imposter syndrome that Dr. Valerie Young identified. And I think it's really interesting to think about and how these show up for me, because while I certainly can identify with feeling like the expert imposter syndrome, as far as like podcasting goes, I've definitely felt like the perfectionist in other aspects of my life, or the soloist in other aspects of my life, or even the super person. For me, the super person comes up when I'm just like trying to be the best in everything, but not really recognizing that I've got so many areas of my life that I'm trying to be the best at that I'm feeling overwhelmed and that this might not be realistic. So, for example, being a mother and being a wife and being an attorney and being a podcaster and being a sister and being a daughter and all of these things that take like an active commitment from me is really difficult. And I feel like sometimes if like when I forgot to pay for Everett's trip to the zoo, and so he wasn't able to get to the zoo, I felt like a piece of shit. But I also felt like I'm obviously not a good mother. Like, obviously. And so Clance and Imes or Eames, they determined that some of what kind of makes people develop imposter syndrome is the societal standards and expectations, and then familial upbringing. And so that's where I really think that, like, for me as a person of color, I think that I probably experience imposter syndrome a little bit differently or a little bit more acutely than white people, and particularly white men. And this is because our society historically, currently, and systematically excludes people of color from positions and places of power and operates to keep people of color marginalized or subjected to the values of white people and white culture. So, when we think about the systemic exclusion of folks of color from opportunity, essentially, I think about all of the places where folks of color could be, but are not, or where there's very few folks of color and it's a predominantly white space. So, for example, in higher education, at PWIs, predominantly white institutions, but also in my field, in the legal field, where there are Black attorneys and there are attorneys of color, but we make up a much smaller percentage than do white people. In fact, only 4.5% of attorneys are Black, when the population in the United States is 13.4%. Roughly 15, 16% of attorneys are folks of color in a profession where only 4.5% of the attorneys look like me. It's really easy for me to feel as though I don't belong in this space because I'm literally not seeing anybody else who looks like me. And lucky for me, I live in Atlanta, where there are actually quite a few attorneys of color, and where I am running into attorneys of color and don't always have to feel like I'm the only one. But as soon as you leave Atlanta, if you know Georgia, you know that as soon as you leave Atlanta, you're by yourself again. And so when we think about our representation in these spaces and lack thereof, for me, that's really where I start feeling this imposter experience of not belonging, because I'm not seeing other people who look like me or who have power in these spaces. Because I might see other people who look like me, but they don't necessarily have power. But it's an isolating feeling. And I'm sure y'all have felt this of like, okay, well, I'm the only one. And not only that, but it at times has made me feel this pressure of like tokenism of like my opinion or what I say, what I speak in this space is going to represent the entire race of Black Americans. And, that's not necessarily true and it's not fair, but that's can be what I feel when I'm the only person in the room who maybe looks like me or one of a few people in the room who look like me. And what I heard recently, I read in the book I'm Not Yelling by Elizabeth Leiba, was this phrase of imposter treatment. And I really like that because one, it makes it not a me problem, it makes it a you problem. Two, it differentiates between this internal process that I am experiencing of self-doubt to an external process of I'm sensing that you think that I don't belong. And although I do think that there's a difference, I know that I'm affected by both of them. I'm affected by you thinking that I don't belong, and I'm affected by me thinking that I don't belong. People who have imposter syndrome, they may try to work harder or overwork to try and overcompensate for their stupidity or to hide their stupidity. They may hide their real selves, their real ideas, or their real values in order to people please. And then essentially, once they've gotten, that person believing in them or that person on their side, they start to let their real selves out. So we also do things like charm people, because again, we want people to like us enough so that when they see that I'm a fake, they don't fire me or they don't ditch me because they like me. They're already committed. They're already invested in Whitney. So they're not going to do anything when they realize that I suck. People with imposter syndrome have fear of failure and also a fear and guilt about success. this like feeling that success is isolating me from my family or my friends or my community might be something that you feel, or a fear of rejection, that you're going to be rejected, and guilt that you're successful, I'm successful when other people aren't. And I know I definitely feel this when I'm working, when I'm going into these jails and prisons that are full of Black and Brown people, of Black and Brown young women, of Black and Brown mothers. And I look at them and I'm like, there's nothing different between it. Like I could be there because Lord knows I've done the things where I could be arrested and could be in that situation. And the whole trajectory of my life could have changed. But the difference between me and them is that I wasn't caught. So I definitely feel this guilt about my success, whereas there are other very smart, very capable, smarter and more capable even people than I am. But I'm the one that's here, living in this success. So how does imposter syndrome and race intersect? And for me, it's the racism and racial exclusion. So when I'm coming into a place as a Black person and this place is historically white or predominantly white, I just feel like I don't belong because this place wasn't made for me. There ain't nobody else up in here that look like me. Of course I'm going to feel other. Of course I'm going to feel different. I think that we also deal a lot with imposter syndrome and the intersectionality with race when we're talking about what our racial cultures mean for us and what they look like for us, and the fact that not all people of color are the same. Not all Black people are the same. One of the first times that I felt I was an imposter was around other Black people because I didn't talk like them, because I didn't dress like them, because I didn't know them like they knew each other. So I didn't know their jokes, the phrases, the terminology. I didn't know the style. So I felt like an imposter even within a community of other Black people. Affirmative action for me has created some kind of feeling. I feel some kind of way sometimes. And it's that I believe in affirmative action. I believe that it's a tool that we can be using to achieve equity in our society, racial equity in our society. But it also makes me wonder whether or not I'm in a space because I belong there, because I deserve to be there, because I worked and succeeded and got the position or the admittance into the school because of what I've done and not because I'm a Black person. And that's, for me, that's internal. Like that may or may not be the case, but that doesn't mean that I didn't work hard to get there or that I don't deserve it. All right. And then this idea of diversity in workplaces. Everybody's heard about the equity hire, or you're only here because you're a person of color, or we need to diversify our staff because we're 20 white people and no people of color. It's understandable that folks would feel like they don't belong or like they didn't earn their space when you're coming into that situation as the only or one of a few of the folks of color or of the females or whoever. So what are the consequences of imposter syndrome? For me, anxiety and depression, this fear that I was talking about, the fear of failure, the guilt about success, and the fear of success, it makes me anxious. And if I'm constantly questioning myself and questioning my capabilities and listening to other people who think that I don't belong and internalizing the attitude that other people are giving me about me not belonging or me not being good enough because of my race or because of my gender, then I get depressed. Like that's sad. That's sad for me. Shame is another thing that I feel as a result, as a consequence of imposter syndrome. I may hold back or miss opportunities because I don't think I deserve it, because I don't think I really worked for it. I might not even apply for the opportunity because I don't think there's any way that I actually can do this job because of my own self-doubt around my capabilities that make no sense. Like that self-doubt is not supported. And then procrastination. I am a procrastinator, y'all. I don't know about you, but particularly when I'm in like this fear, this anxiety that's being caused by this imposter syndrome of like, I'm a fake, then I don't want to do the thing because I'm afraid that doing the thing is going to prove that I'm a fake. So legal writing is the example that I always use. I hate legal writing. I think I suck at it. And I procrastinate when I do have to write a brief, because I feel like I'm going to send you this brief and you're going to know when you read that brief that I don't know what I was talking about, that I don't know how I passed law school. I don't know how I got through legal writing. I don't know how I got through civil procedure, because I don't know what I'm doing. So how can we leverage imposter syndrome? Never stop learning. No matter how advanced we are in our career or how much of an expert we think that we are, never stop learning. I think that imposter syndrome is a valuable tool for humility and just like accepting where we're at, accepting that we don't know everything, accepting that we have more space to learn. Prove them different. When you're somebody that's experiencing imposter treatment, show them how wrong they are. That might mean over preparing, which, yes, does go into overworking a little bit. But that also might mean like speaking up when they don't expect you to, taking that risk and showing them, no, actually, I know what I'm talking about. Thank you, though. Let their mouths drop open from their shock that, oh my gosh, you know something. I love when that happens. What are some tools that I use? My sister circle. Whenever I'm experiencing imposter syndrome, I reach out to my sister circle and I tell them, like, look, this is what I got going on this week. I don't feel like I know what I'm doing. And I let them pump me up and affirm me. I dress the part. So what this means is that when I'm going into a space where I feel like I don't belong, I dress in a way that makes me feel confident about myself. So even today, like I went and got photos done for the podcast. I got some professional photos done. I put makeup on. I dressed up. I looked good because I wanted that confidence. I wanted to feel that confidence so that I can create good pictures. And so that I can be like the person I know I am. I don't want to shrink to the imposter syndrome. Prepare and play the tape through. So what I do is I think about all the reasons why like I actually do belong here, or I actually do know what I'm doing. So like I think about if it's going to court, I think about all the cases that I have litigated, all the great arguments that I've made, all of the great cross-examinations that I've done. I think about all the great witness prep that I've done, or the legal writing, or where I was successful. I think about those things, and usually I'm thinking about those things on the way to the place. Releasing my ego. So just like acknowledging that it's okay to make a mistake. Perfectionism is my enemy, and I am a perfectionist. And this podcast has been so difficult for me because I am a perfectionist. But I ain't got time for this. I do not have time to be a perfectionist. I don't have the time, and I don't have the money to hire somebody to do it for me. So you get what you get. So releasing the ego and humanizing myself as somebody that is a person that makes mistakes, that needs to take some time out to breathe, that needs to just release the episode without spending hours and hours on editing, because like who the F cares? And then lastly, I don't compare myself to others. That's not true. I do compare myself to others, but when I'm trying to beat imposter syndrome, I try not to compare myself to others, because that doesn't help anybody. Like I'm not them. I'm not them. I'm not you. And you're not me. I am Whitney. You're you. And that is what it is. So I don't need to compare. Like, I don't know what you got going on. I don't know how many hours that you were able to spend studying or not studying. I don't know what money you have in your pocket that made XYZ resource available to you. Like, I just don't know. So I don't need to spend my energy and my time assuming and comparing myself to you to make myself feel like shit. So instead, particularly when I'm living in this fear and this anxiety, I just like accept myself for who I am, what I'm coming with, what my resources are, love myself, celebrate myself, validate myself, so that I can keep it moving. Because the fact of the matter is, like, I'm prepared for this shit, you know? And if I'm not, then I'm doing the things that I need to do to get prepared. Like, that's the kind of person that I am. I think that's probably the kind of person that you are. So let's just be that. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for listening today. As you go throughout your week, consider when you're living within your imposter syndrome, and try and use some of these tools that I discussed, like having a close circle of friends or community that you can rely on to help get you out of that imposter syndrome. How can you use your style, your creativity, your fashion? For me, it's dressing the part, but for you, what is it? Prepare and play the tape all the way through. Release your ego, allow yourself to be human, and stop comparing yourself to others. Be validated. You the shit, yo. That's a wrap on today's episode of Impostrix Podcast. You've just listened to an asked and answered session where I've talked about a topic that is of interest to you, and this was a solo episode. Our playlist has all sorts of content that includes solo episodes with just myself and also episodes with guests. So feel free to scroll through, find a topic that you're interested in, and listen. If you have questions or comments that you want me to answer, feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram at Impostrix Podcast, or to send me an email at impostrixpodcast@gmail.com. You can also go to my website, www.impostrixpodcast.com, and do the little speak pipe thing, which allows you to record a voice message and leave me a message. I'll do my best to respond. I'm so grateful for the time that you spent with me today. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share with your friends and with your family and with your colleagues. I would really appreciate it, matter of fact. If you could just send this link to this episode to one of the people in your community who you think could benefit from this content. I'm excited at this thing that we're creating, and it takes both of us. So thank you. And don't forget, you belong. I believe in you. Be validated.